Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S classes. Last week, the Government of India has presented the Economic Survey on the floor of the Parliament. Economic Survey is an annual publication provided by Government of India which will provide you information regarding the economic events that have occurred in the last 1 year. From the UPSC perspective, Economic Survey holds a very high importance as the questions will be asked both in prelims as well as in mains. So before I start the discussion from the first chapter, I just want to tell you some of the very important pointers with respect to Economic Survey. There are two volumes in the Economic Survey, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Volume 1 consists of 9 chapters and Volume 2 consists of 10 chapters. In terms of bulkiness, Volume 2 is more bulky compared to Volume 1. Volume 2 consists of more than 190 pages and Volume 1 consists around 150 pages. In terms of reading, you must focus Volume 2 from perspective of UPSC prelims as it is a fact-based, lot of graphs, a lot of numbers have been provided. So there is a very high possibility that questions will be asked in Volume 2 in the prelims. And Volume 1 is conceptual based, the reading of which will require you to understand the basic concepts first of all. You must be very thorough with the concepts such as GDP, GVA, inflation, IIP, ease of doing business index, etc. And since Volume 1 is majorly concept based, you can expect questions in this particular volume both in prelims as well as in mains. So these are some of the very important pointers that are associated with the Economic Survey. So with this understanding, let's start the discussion from the first chapter. In this particular video, I'll be covering the first 3 chapters of the first volume. The first chapter is on outlook of the Indian economy. In this particular chapter, we'll be discussing 4 very important points. And before I start the main discussion, I just want to tell you that there are many information or many facts which have been provided in both the volumes. But our analysis and discussion will be solely from the prerogative of the UPSC requirement. So the 4 points that are important from UPSC perspective from the first chapter are the achievements as well as the vulnerabilities of the Indian economy, the decoupling or the separation of Indian economic growth with the rest of the world economic growth, outlook for the financial year 18 as well as 19, and fourth, what are the steps which are needed to be taken by the Government of India. So let me start with the first point, that is achievements as well as the vulnerabilities of the Indian economy. The Economic Survey has listed 3 very important achievements. One is the formation of a GST Council, and second, setting up of a insolvency bankruptcy code, and the third one, rationalization of the expenditure. Let me start with the first one, formation of the GST Council. Now we all know that from 1st July 2017, the Government of India has brought into force the Goods and Services Tax, which has majorly subsumed the indirect taxes as well as the cesses which were present under the earlier taxation regime. Now one of the important outcomes of the implementation of GST has been the formation of the GST Council. Now in the GST Council, there is a representation of both the central government as well as the state government, and this formation of a GST Council represents cooperative federalism. Now the formation of a GST Council is an achievement because if you see in the global market, especially what is happening in the European Union as well as the policies in the United States of America, you see that these countries are more and more moving towards their nativism. Whereas in case of India, by opting for more cooperation and coordination by setting up of a GST Council, we are moving towards a cooperative federalism. This model of a GST Council can be utilized to resolve some of the issues such as interstate river water disputes, implementation of a direct benefit transfer across all the states in India, and providing a portability of social security benefits across state lines. Second, setting up of insolvency and bankruptcy code. As per RBI survey, the non-performing assets have started peaking in the Indian banking sector from the financial year 2015. And this particular menace of non-performing assets will continue to persist even in the year 2018. Now the Government of India was in a dilemma, that is, if the Government of India doesn't resolve the issue of a non-performing asset, it will have a spillover effect on the whole growth prospects of Indian economy. Whereas if it provides any of the bailout packages for the private sector or the companies which are under the insolvency resolution, then the government will be perceived to support the industrialist or the capitalist class. To balance both the objectives, the Government of India has implemented the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code from 1st December 2016. And so far we have seen that more than 1000 cases have been filed under the NCLTs across India, of which more than 500 cases have been admitted by NCLTs, that is National Company Law Tribunals. Now, this particular code, that is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, has all the provisions which can take care of the non-performing asset menace across the sectors, that is industrial sector as well as household sector. Third, the Government of India has implemented various programs in the last 1 year to ensure that the revenue expenditure quality increases. For example, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala scheme, direct benefit transfer, Saubhagya scheme, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan are some of the programs which have basically rationalized the expenditure of Government of India, and the efficiency of this particular expenditure can be increased by ensuring that the beneficiaries get the right amount of benefits and utilize the benefits rightfully. Having said so, the Indian economy faces two vulnerable points. One is a fiscal deficit and the second one is current account deficit. Fiscal deficit basically represents the excess expenditure done by Government of India compared to the receipts or the revenue generated by Government of India. And since the expenditure is higher, the Government of India is forced to borrow from the market. These borrowings in essence comprise the fiscal deficit of Government of India. The Government of India in the budget for 2017 and 18 had expected the fiscal deficit to be reduced to 3.2%, or the target which was set up by Government of India in the budget was 3.2%, and it has been revised very recently to 3.5%. As a result of this kind of a revision, we have seen that there is a turmoil in the bond market. Apart from this, the fiscal deficit will have certain negative consequences such as the borrowing rate of Government of India will suddenly spike up, the sovereign credit rating will come under a lot of pressure, and the Government of India is forced to borrow from the market more and more in the future years. So how do you control the fiscal deficit? Economic Survey gives two recommendations, that is either increase the revenue or the receipts of Government of India or else reduce the expenditure done by Government of India. Now this increase in the receipts or the revenues can be done by increasing the tax to GDP ratio. Economic Survey points out that the tax to GDP ratio of the central government of today is similar to tax to GDP ratio of the central government during the 1980s ages. Now the problem is that between 1980 to the present days, the GDP on an average has grown by 6.5%, whereas the tax to GDP ratio has remained constant between these two periods. Hence, the tax to GDP ratio has to be increased. Now the implementation of GST, that is Goods and Services Tax, will provide more tax revenues for the Government of India, and this has been explained by Finance Minister in the recently concluded budget, wherein he has stated that from financial year 19, the tax revenues will be boosted with the implementation of the GST. So this particular implementation may help the Government of India break the barrier of a tax to GDP ratio. Second, the Government of India must control the expenditure by controlling the conversion of a contingent liability into actual liabilities. Now question arises, what is a contingent liability? Contingent liabilities are potential liabilities which will become actual liabilities based on a future event. For example, the failure of a DISCOMs may lead to higher liabilities on Government of India, or providing more recapitalization package to improve the situation of the public sector banks is a contingent liability today but may become actual liability tomorrow. So basically the Government of India has to ensure that the conversion of contingent liability to actual liabilities decline over a period of time, hence expenditure will be reduced. Now by ensuring that the tax to GDP ratio increases over a period of time and the conversion of a contingent liability to actual liabilities decrease over a period of time, the Government of India will be able to control the fiscal deficit. The second vulnerability that the Indian economy faces today is the current account deficit. The CAD for the financial year 13 was as high as 7.8%, but by 2016 this has decreased to 0.8%. But in the year 2017 this again has increased to 1.6%, and 2018 it is expected that it will reach 1.7%. Now the two reasons why the current account deficit is expanding in case of India is one, the crude oil prices are increasing. As per Bloomberg, in the last 1 year itself, the crude oil prices have increased by more than 30%, and in the next year will increase by more than 16%. It simply means that current account deficit will continue to worsen in case of India. And the second reason that has led to huge current account deficit is the appreciation in case of Indian rupee. As per one of the surveys, the appreciation in the Indian rupee in the last 4 years has been about 21%. And we all know that whenever the Indian rupee appreciates, the imports will become costlier and the exports will start fetching lower returns. As a result of this, the current account deficit has expanded in the last 1.5 years for the Indian economy. Now, how do I control the current account deficit? It can be done by promoting the exports, and this particular objective will be achieved by promoting Make in India. And second, the government of India very recently has reviewed the foreign trade policy of 2015 to 2020, under which one of the major objectives is to promote exports. In case of Make in India, it was launched with two objectives. One, to increase the contribution of a manufacturing sector to GDP from 16% to 25%, and second objective was to ensure that the manufacturing in India becomes globally competitive, as a result of which exports will be increased from Indian market to the global market. As far as the performance of the Make in India is concerned, the first objective has been to a very great extent achieved, whereas India is lacking in terms of the second objective. Hence, Government of India needs to ensure that exports from the Indian economy to the global economy increase, as a result of which the current account deficit will start coming down. The first reason for this kind of a decoupling is very high interest rates in the Indian economy. The interest rates will determine how much investments will be done in new projects, which will basically drive the growth rate in case of the Indian economy, or for that matter any of the economies. This particular graph will represent what has been the movement of the real interest rates in countries such as India compared to countries such as Korea as well as USA. What you will see is there is a clear line of a separation between the interest rates of India as well as the other two countries. The first reason for this kind of a decoupling is the real interest rates. In case of India, the monetary policy announcements led to very high real interest rates in the economy, whereas in the major economies or around the world, in many of the economies, the real interest rates were very low. For example, in this particular graph, you can see that in the second half of 2016, the real interest rates increased in case of India, whereas in the same time period, the real interest rates in Korea as well as USA have declined. As per economic survey, it has been found that the real interest rates in Indian economy increased by 2.5%, whereas the real interest rates in these countries have declined by 1%. And whenever the real interest rates are very high, it will lead to two outcomes. One, the capital inflows into Indian economy have increased, as a result of which rupee value has also appreciated. And when the rupee value appreciates, the exports will start fetching lower returns and the imports will start becoming costlier. And it is said that from the second half of 2016 till 2017, the Indian rupee has appreciated by more than 9%. The second thing that will be the outcome of this kind of higher real interest rates is that investment as well as consumption will keep on declining because the interest rates are very higher. The second reason for this kind of a decoupling is the implementation of policy measures such as demonetization as well as GST. Now, it's a matter of fact that the policy measures, that is GST as well as demonetization, have basically disrupted the value chain systems in the informal economy as well as the MSME sector. As a result of which, it has been found that in the first quarter of 2017 and 2018, the exports from Indian economy have declined abruptly and imports into Indian economy have increased abruptly. In the same time period, in other Asian countries, exports have increased and imports have decreased. These two graphs will represent the variation in the exports and imports in Indian economy compared to other Asian economies. For example, on the left hand side, you can see this particular graph which represents that the exports from the Indian economy have abruptly fallen down, whereas in other Asian countries, the exports have suddenly increased. And in this particular graph, that is the left side graph, you will see that imports into Indian economy have suddenly increased, whereas imports in various Asian economies have become subdued over a period of time. So basically, the demonetization as well as the GST had a huge impact and led to decrease in exports and increase in imports, which had an impact on the current account deficit. Third reason that has led to decoupling of Indian economy is the twin balance sheet challenge. It's a matter of a fact that from financial year 15, the non-performing assets have kept on increasing, and majority of the non-performing assets are basically in the public sector banks. And this impact of a very high non-performing asset is seen on the profit after tax or the profit or the earning levels of these public sector banks, which have gone into negative in the last 3 years. As a result of this, this particular outcome is exhibited in the lending activities done by the public sector banks to the industrial sectors. What we have seen is that very high non-performing asset will force the banking sector to provide huge provisions to write off these non-performing assets over a period of time, as a result of which this is reflected in the lending activities conducted by the banking sector. Very recently, it has been found that the rate of growth of credit to the industrial sector has entered into negative, which is the first time which has happened in the last 2 decades. But luckily, in the month of November, the rate of credit to the industrial sector has started picking up. The fourth reason for this kind of a decoupling is increase in the oil prices. In the last 3 years, the government of India has made a huge windfall because of a decrease in the international crude oil prices. It is said that the reduction in the crude oil prices have led to increase in the revenue or a decrease in the outflow of a government of India's expenditure by 1% of GDP. And very recently, the crude oil prices have started inching upwards, as a result of which government of India is forced to pay higher amount for the imports of the crude oil prices. In the last 1 year, that is in the year 2017 and 18, compared to 2016 and 17 prices, there has been increase of around 16%, and this particular price will also keep on increasing in the coming year, as a result of which government of India will be forced to pay higher amount of dollars for the import of a crude oil that we are going to import into India. The third issue in this particular chapter is the outlook for the Indian economy for financial year 2018 as well as 2019. As per CSO's estimations, the GDP growth rate for the financial year 18 will be somewhere around 6.5%. But economic survey states that the green shoots of recovery are visible in some of the numbers such as GDP, IIP and GVA. Not only this, the exports have started picking up in the month of November. Not only this, even the remittances have also started picking up into India. As a result of this, economic survey states that the growth rate for the financial year 2017-18 might be somewhere in the range of 6.75%. And if all the factors remain constant, that is, crude oil prices suddenly do not increase, imports come down, and exports from Indian economy increase, and remittances also keep on increasing, it is possible that Indian economy may achieve a growth rate of 7 to 7.5% in the financial year 2018 and 19. But having said so, economic survey also states that the government of India needs to implement certain reforms to ensure that the potential growth rates are achieved. For example, the banking reforms have to be implemented. Specifically under banking reforms, the focus is on recapitalization as well as consolidation of the banking sector. The government of India has already announced a recapitalization package of 2.1 lakh crores. But economic survey states that this particular recapitalization package has to be implemented very efficiently and as soon as possible, so that the banking sector growth is revived and the credit growth also is revived. Second, the consolidation has to be done in such a way that the weaker banks either are strengthened or are merged into stronger banks. With regards to this, the government of India has already set up an alternative mechanism which is headed by the finance minister, which will provide recommendations for the consolidation of the banking sector. Apart from this, the government of India needs to ensure that GST structure is stabilized on war footing. Some of the issues which are plaguing the GST structure are 1. Timely provision of an input tax credit, implementation of an e-way bill, and rationalization of the tariff structure. Third point, the government of India needs to privatize Air India as soon as possible. This disinvestment or divesting Air India will basically provide huge amount of revenues for government of India, which might help government of India trying to bridge part of the fiscal deficit. And government of India needs to formulate certain policies to counter the disruptions which may derail the growth prospects of the Indian economy. These disruptions could be international crude oil prices, second, inflation rate in the Indian market, third, vegetable prices as well as pulse prices, etc. So these are the 4 issues which are very important from perspective of UPSC exams from the first chapter. Let's go to the second chapter. The second chapter is on the implementation of GST and the information that has been derived with implementation of GST. We all know that from 1st July 2017, the Government of India brought into effect the Goods and Services Tax. Goods and Services Tax is basically a single tax which will subsume most of the indirect taxes which are present in the Indian economy, as well as some of the very important cesses which were present earlier. The benefits of GST as per the Government of India will be: 1. It will lead to creation of a national market. It will wipe out the cascading effect. It will reduce the market cost or market prices which will benefit the consumers. It will also lead to formalization of the economy, and the most important outcome of this particular GST will be the information regarding the taxpayers will be available for Government of India now. This particular hidden information or the information which is available because of the implementation of GST has been discussed in the second chapter. In this particular chapter, these are the 5 areas that I will be discussing. Let me start with the first area, that is with implementation of GST, what has been the improvement or what has been the change in the taxpayer base. Now, before the implementation of GST, there were multiple types of indirect taxes. The number of unique registrants in the pre-GST era were to the tune of 6.4 million. And with implementation of GST, the number of unique registrants has increased to 9.8 million. That is, there has been a spike or increase of 3.4 million registrants or the firms which have come under the GST bracket. Apart from this, under GST, there are 2 very important points. One is a concept of a composition scheme, and second, a concept of a threshold level. Under composition scheme, basically the firms or the registrants, rather than paying the GST rates according to the tariff structure, will pay a flat tax rate. For example, under composition scheme, the merchants and the traders have been asked to pay a flat tax rate of 1%, and the restaurants will end up paying a flat tax rate of 5%. Now, this concept has been provided under a composition scheme. Apart from this particular provision, there are other provisions such as the threshold under the composition scheme, that is, the turnover of the firm should not have crossed 1.5 crore, and composition scheme can be availed only for intrastate sales, and any registrant who has opted for a composition scheme will not be provided with input tax credit. Now, it has been seen that there are more than 3 million registrants who are eligible to opt for composition scheme. But having said so, only 1.6 million registrants have opted for a composition scheme, and more than 50% of eligible registrants have said that they will pay the GST taxation under the normal tariff structure rather than opting for composition scheme. This particular change has happened for a simple reason. These companies are basically acting as vendors or will provide goods or services to big companies, and big companies would want to utilize the input tax credit. In this particular scenario, if a company or a vendor has registered under a composition scheme and provides a certain goods to a big company, the big company will not be able to utilize input tax credit. Hence, more than 50% of the eligible registrants who can get the composition scheme or who can opt for the composition scheme have stayed away from the composition scheme. Second is a concept of a threshold turnover. Under the GST provisions, any firm which has got a threshold turnover or a turnover of lesser than 20 lakh rupees need not get registered under GST. But despite this particular provision, it has been seen that around 1.7 million registrants have become part of the GST taxation structure despite having a turnover of lesser than 20 lakh rupees. Now, this particular compliance, that is voluntary compliance, has been elicited because of the GST structure. Now, this kind of a compliance has been done for a simple reason. These particular firms are having a huge amount of a trade with the bigger companies, and since they are trading more than 60% of their products from the bigger companies, they want to utilize the input tax credit which is provided under GST. Apart from this, the information that can be derived with respect to taxpayers base is out of 9.8 million registrants, 34% of the turnover comes from the B2B business, that is business to business, and around 17% of the turnover comes from B2C business, that is business to customer, and around 30% of the turnover lies in the export sector. The second area of discussion in this particular chapter is tax base as well as the spatial distribution. Before the implementation of GST, there were two concerns. First concern was with respect to revenue neutrality. That is, with implementation of GST, will there be any loss of revenues? As per the recommendations of GST Council, it basically stated that with implementation of GST, the tax revenues should be somewhere around 66 lakh crore rupees. At the same point of time, RNR committee, that is the Revenue Neutral Rate Committee, recommended that the taxes which are collected with the implementation of GST, that is specifically indirect taxes, should be to the tune of 69 lakh crores. And as per the recent estimates which have been given by Government of India, they have stated that the GST revenues will be in the range of 65 lakh crores to 70 lakh crores, which is on the similar lines of the recommendations given by these two committees. So in essence, revenue neutrality has been maintained. Second issue of concern with respect to implementation of GST was from the viewpoint of the manufacturing states such as Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka. The concern was that GST is a destination based tax. That is, if a manufacturing happens in one state and consumption happens in other state, under GST, the taxes which are collected, that is SGST component, will go to the state government where the consumption has happened. For example, let's assume a scenario where the manufacturing happens in Karnataka, but the sales and the consumption of this particular product happens in Kerala. Now, all of us know that GST has got a dual structure, that is CGST as well as SGST. SGST component in this particular trade or a transaction will be going to the state government of Kerala, whereas the manufacturing has happened in the state of Karnataka. There is a fear amongst these particular manufacturing states that since their base is manufacturing, they may lose out on the revenues with the implementation of GST. So what has happened so far with the implementation of GST? I'll explain this with help of three diagrams or three graphs. On the left hand side, basically it represents of the total GST that has been accumulated at various states, which states or which of the states have got the highest amount of GST. And if you just see that extreme left hand side, the three states that is Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka followed by UP and Gujarat are the states which have collected the highest amount of taxes. The state of Maharashtra has collected 16% of the GST taxes so far, and Tamil Nadu has collected 10% of the GST taxes so far. Karnataka government has collected 9% of the GST taxes so far. So basically the fear that the manufacturing states will lose out with implementation of GST has not become true. Second, the graph basically represents the relationship between share of a gross state domestic product and the share of a taxation, that is a GST taxation for all the states. A basic connection is that as your gross state domestic product increases, your taxation base, that is a GST collection base, must also increase. And this kind of an correlation or this kind of a straightforward relationship has been very true in case of manufacturing states such as Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, wherein we have seen that higher the contribution in terms of the GSTP, higher will be the collection of taxation revenues. Another graph that is present here basically represents a correlation between share of manufacturing in each of the states GDPs and the collection of GST taxes with respect to these particular states. There is a very strong correlation in the states where the manufacturing base is very high and the collection of taxes are also very high, that is specifically the GST taxes. The correlation is stronger in case of manufacturing states such as Maharashtra as well as Gujarat. Basically, it proves that the concern of the manufacturing states that they would lose out on the revenues with implementation of GST is not true. The third area of discussion in this particular chapter is with implementation of GST, we can now decipher the information on the size of the firms and the contribution of these particular firms to the GST base and in what kind of a business they are involved in. This particular table gives you a very fair idea about the types of firms. For the purpose of calculation, the economic survey has classified the firms or the registrants under 5 types, that is below threshold, composition, SME, medium and large firm. And this particular classification has been done based on their turnover. For example, below threshold are the firms where the turnover is lesser than 20 lakh rupees. Composition, for the sake of calculation, they have said that the firms whose turnover is more than 20 lakh but lesser than 1 crore rupees will be under composition. SMEs, the turnover will be more than 1 crore rupees but lesser than 5 crore. Medium, the turnover is more than 5 crore but lesser than 100 crore. And large firms are those where the revenues or the turnover is more than 100 crore rupees. So, what is the information that you can derive from this particular table? First, you can see that the companies, that is firms, GST registrants which are below the threshold, in terms of numbers, these comprise 1/3 of the total firms, whereas they contribute only around 0.4% or lesser than 1% of the total turnover, as well as lesser than 1% of the tax liability. Whereas on the other side, that is extreme side, the large firms where the turnover is more than 100 crore rupees, these comprise lesser than 1% in terms of a total number of firms or registrants under GST, whereas they account for 2/3 of the total turnover generated in the economy, and they account for more than 50% of the total tax liability. This is the kind of information that can be derived and that has been possible because of the implementation of the GST. Next area of discussion in this particular chapter is what is the connection between the international trade, that is exports from one state into international market, or export of one state into rest of the states within India itself. What is the connection with the trade and with the economic prosperity? Economic survey points out that the 5 states which are the topmost exporting states in case of India are Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Telangana. And of the 5, Maharashtra accounts for the highest amount of exports from India, and the percentage exports from Maharashtra is 22%. Gujarat accounts for 17% of exports, and Karnataka accounts for around 12% of exports. UPSC may ask a question in the prelims based on this only, so please be very careful with respect to this. And these 5 states account for more than 70% of exports from India. Not only this, as per last year's economic survey, it was stated that the interstate trade within India itself accounts for around 30% to 50% of the GDP, whereas this year's economic survey has stated that with implementation of GST, it is able to find out what is the exact trade that is happening between one state to another state or across the interstate in case of India. And it has come to a conclusion that interstate trade in case of India is to the tune of around 60% of the GDP. Not only this, it has also given information with respect to which are the 5 states which are major exporting state, that is again within India itself, and which are the top 5 importing states. The top 5 largest exporting states within India are Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. And the top 5 largest importing states within India are Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka and Gujarat. Now basically what you can infer from this kind of an information is that the states which are majorly exporting states are also some of the majorly importing states, and these exporting states are those states which are also developed on a very higher level. So basically you can connect the exporting factor with the development or the economic prosperity of a state. The fifth and final area of a discussion in this particular chapter is that using GST data we can find out what part of the economy is formal and what part of the economy is informal. Now basically this particular chapter defines, or the economic survey defines, formal companies as based on 2 factors, either the employees of either the central government, state government or the private sector are provided certain social security net, or else these are the firms or the companies which are under the taxation net, that is these are the registered companies under the GST taxation. Based on the analysis, economic survey concludes that in case of Indian economy, only 0.6% of the total firms are hardcore formal companies or firms, that is these are covered under the taxation bracket, as well as these are the ones which are providing the social security net. On the extreme side of it, there are 87% of the firms which neither are covered under the taxation bracket as well as social security net. In between these two extremes, right, 12% of the firms are under the taxation bracket but do not provide any kind of a social security net, and only 0.1% of the firms are not under the taxation net but are providing the social security net. But having said so, economic survey states that these 0.1% of the firms are basically the firms which are following in the sector which are exempted under the GST provisions, such as electricity, such as healthcare, education, etc. So these are some of the points, very important points which are covered under this particular second chapter, that is the GST and the hidden information. The third chapter is titled Savings and Investment, and in this particular chapter I will be covering three important areas. One, concept of a savings investment, GCF and GFCF, and second, changes in the savings and investment of what has happened in case of Indian economy, and what is the way out or the reforms which have to be done by Government of India to ensure higher savings and investments are done in case of India. Let me start with the basic concept of a savings investment, GCF and GFCF. Now the basic concept is that for economic growth to happen in an economy, there is a need of a savings and investment which will lead to economic growth. Let's take up an example. For example, if I've earned an income of 100 rupees, out of 100 rupees, I'll keep aside 40 rupees and use 60 rupees for the immediate consumption, that is either goods or services. Of the remaining 40 rupees, which is a concept of a savings, I may make an investment of let's say 30 rupees in a fixed deposit in a bank. Now the bank uses this 30 rupees to give loans to an industry which will make higher production, that is install capacity, and make higher production which will contribute to growth of an economy. So basically the concept is the savings and investments are a part and parcel of promoting economic growth in any of the economies. In this particular concept, the other two concepts used are one is GCF and the other one is GFCF. GCF stands for gross capital formation and GFCF stands for gross fixed capital formation. Gross capital formation basically represents how much investments as a percentage of GDP are done in an economy. The formula that is used for GCF is basically investments divided by GDP into 100. Now this particular formula represents what is a GCF, that is gross capital formation, and higher the GCF, higher the prospects of growth in an economy. And within the GCF there are two components, and the most important component within the GCF is GFCF, that is investments within the GCF which are done on fixed assets such as infrastructure, that is roadways, railways, civil aviation, manufacturing facilities, industries, tunnels, bridges, etc. That comprises GFCF, which stands for gross fixed capital formation. So what has been the situation of a savings as well as the investment in case of Indian economy? It is said that from 2010 the savings have started declining in case of India, and from 2012 the investments have started declining in case of India. But before this particular situation, what was the scenario in case of India? If you see in case of a domestic savings, in 2003 the domestic savings were to the tune of around 29% of GDP. By 2007 we hit a peak of more than 38% of GDP, and from 2010 this particular savings has started declining and by 2016 it has declined to 29% of GDP, which is a cause of concern for Government of India. Not only this, even the GFCF, that is a gross fixed capital formation, which was 26.5% of GDP in 2003, increased or peaked to 35.6% in the year 2007, and from 2012 it has started having a decline, and by 2017 it had declined to 26.4%. That is, in the last 11 years, there has been more than 8% decline in case of both GFCF as well as domestic savings. Now, which are the sectors because of which these savings as well as investments have declined? In case of savings and investments, basically the savings will come from two areas. One is public sector and the other one is private sector. Public sector basically represents savings and investments which are done by Government of India, departments, ministries, so on and so forth. In case of private sector, again there are two sources. One is private companies or firms and households. In case of India, the most important point is that more than 60% of the savings historically has come from the household sector. Now what we see is that the decline in the savings as well as investment in two different time periods has been very high in case of the public sector as well as the private sector. For example, if you just look at this particular table, it basically provides you a chronicling or the variation in a change in investment as well as a change in savings between two different time periods. Now, why these two time periods are being taken? This is for a simple reason. Between these two time periods, there was a global economic crisis or global financial crisis. What is the information that you must derive from this particular table? If you see that between 2004 and 5 to 2007 and 8, the investments have increased by 9.1%. But after this, in a span of 8 years, that is financial year 8 to financial year 16, the investments have declined by 6.3%. Out of this particular decline, majority of the decline, that is around 80% of the decline, has come from the private sector itself. If you see the other side of the table, which represents the information on a change in savings, you will see that there is a more than 7% decline in 8 years after the global financial crisis, and this particular decline has come from the two sectors, that is public sector as well as the private sector. This decline in both savings as well as investment is one of the worries for Government of India. And Government of India in the last couple of years has taken various measures which will increase the savings as well as investment. Especially one of the reforms that has been recently taken by Government of India, that is a recapitalization package for the banking sector, will ensure that the private sector, that is the private corporates, will be able to get a huge amount of capital available at a lower rates, as a result of which their investment in the market will pick up. Not only this, the implementation of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code will also ensure that the investment from the corporate sector will increase over a period of time. Now, since we have established that there is a slowdown in both savings and investment, it will give rise to two questions. One, what should the Government of India's policies be? Should it promote savings first, then should it promote investments, or now should it promote investments, then later savings, or should it promote both of them simultaneously? Traditionally, the answer has been that the government must always promote both the savings as well as investment parallelly. But various surveys have shown that promoting investment will always have a better impact on growth prospects of an economy rather than promoting savings. Nevertheless, promoting savings is also important. But basically, idea is that if you promote investment, it will lead to growth, and this increase in the growth will again lead to higher savings and higher investment in the economy. So the Government of India must focus on the fact that it needs to promote investment now. But the problem is that in case of India, it's a special case. Why it is a special case? Because the investment decline has happened because of a balance sheet problem, or this investment decline is because of issues associated with the balance sheet. That is, over a period of time, we have seen that the corporates or the firms functioning in case of India have suffered because of a non-performing asset, have suffered because of a global slowdown, have suffered because of a economic slowdown within the domestic market, as a result of which their investments into the new projects have also declined. Added to this, even the real interest rates in case of Indian economy are higher, which will further decline the number of new projects which are to be announced by the private sector. And as per the survey, it has been found that reversing this particular trend, that is reversing investments which are because of a balance sheet problem, is very difficult and requires a huge structural reforms by Government of India. In some of the surveys, it has been shown that this recovery of investment will be by 25%, that is investment will recover by 25% after 14 years of the slowdown has started, and it will recover by more than 40% after 17 years of a slowdown of the investment. And in case of India, it has been just 11 years since the slowdown has begun, that is from 2007 to 2017. So basically, it means that the Government of India needs to ensure that it acts fast on its feet and revives the investment as soon as possible. So what is the way out, or what is the solution to revive the investment? The Government of India has already taken two very important measures. One, it has increased the investment, that is a public investment, and second, it has already ensured that there is an insolvency resolution process which will provide the insolvency resolution for the corporate sector as well as individual borrowers within a fixed time frame. As per IBC, the insolvency resolution will be provided within a time period of either 180 days, which can be extended by another 90 days. So in essence, insolvency resolution now will be provided within 270 days. This kind of a quick insolvency resolution process will ensure that investment is flowed back into the economy, as a result of which the investment to GDP ratio over a period of time will pick up. Apart from this, the Government of India also needs to take certain measures such as the ease of the doing business and the costs of doing business must be further reduced. For example, under ease of doing business ranking, India has performed very well, but under certain parameters such as enforcing the contracts, India has been performing very bad even today. Second, the transparent taxation structure and regulatory environment must be created which will basically facilitate more investment and more savings in the Indian economy. And third, the conducive environment for MSME sector to invest, thrive, contribute to growth, create employment, contribute to exports must be provided. And as such, MSME sector is very important, and the government of India has already taken various measures to promote investments in the MSME sector. This is also very important for a simple reason. MSME sector has been severely affected because of a policy implementation such as GST as well as demonetization. So these are some of the issues that are very important from our perspective of UPSC exams in this particular chapter, that is third chapter of Volume 1 Economic Survey 2017 and 18. Thank you.